Alors, basically, tell me, so can you please introduce yourself?
So my name is Pierre-Marc and Dr. I was born and grew up in the Principality of Monaco until high school. I wasn't a big fan of the French system, so I started applying to the UK. And at the last moment, someone who you worked with, Dr. Silly, I met with someone who had done ESCP followed by a Harvard MBA. So he told me about ESCP, which ended up being the school I went for undergrad because they offered, although it was a French school, an international program. So I studied in London, Madrid, Berlin. I took a gap year when I worked on my thesis. I was an auditor at Ernst & Young in Monaco. Then I went on to work at a multifamily office in London before doing my master's in management at Georgetown University in the US.
Okay, very good, very good. So, tell me, most of our students study in Europe, okay? So they go for, I don't know, LBS, ESSEC, Bocconi. Why have you decided to study in the US? What was the idea behind that? Was it because you wanted to extend your international exposure, because you trust the American system more? You had already had enough?
So I applied in Europe as well. I was accepted in the Master of Finance at Imperial, but I wasn't really interested in having the same experience. Monaco is a very small place, 2 square kilometers, so I've always been a fan of trying to get as much international exposure to use it later on in the career, have many contacts around the world. And so that's why I had already worked, studied, and lived in the UK, especially in London. So I prioritized the US because it was always a goal of mine to stay there for a few years before coming back to Europe, and that's why I headed there in the end.
Alors, what is it like to study at Georgetown, and how different it is from what you experienced at ESCP?
ESCP has some very good teachers. It's among the best ranked in Europe for a lot of their degrees. But once you reach a certain level of international exposure, a lot of French schools suffer from this, with all their names being acronyms. They don't really carry a lot of weight. HEC, INSEAD, ESCP, ESSEC, they're really good schools, but even other schools in the entire world are going to be more considered compared to them because they don't ring as much of a bell. The professors are good, but Georgetown, I would say the professors we had there were on another level. I can give a simple example where one of my ESCP classes for operations management said, "Oh, you should study this book. It's kind of the Bible of operations management, so read it if you want to go more in depth into the subject." And the person who actually wrote that book was my professor at Georgetown. All the professors I had there were all doctorates from Wharton, Stanford, Harvard. They were teaching in all the best schools as well. Georgetown has been considered a hidden Ivy, and even a few people I've talked to would consider Georgetown and NYU, for example, that are not Ivy League schools over Cornell or others, because the Ivy system is still present in people's minds, but it's starting to go away with schools that aren't part of that class and that standing, but are being more recognized for what they offer their students.
Okay, very good. So, what is a typical week at Georgetown?
It depends, because the program I did at the McDonough School of Business, it was more or less, the US are now starting to offer specialized masters. Before it was undergrads, you work for a few years and you do an MBA, whereas Europe was offering straight after bachelor specialized masters. And now Europe is starting to offer MBAs and the US are starting to offer masters in finance, data analytics, those things. So for mine, the Master of Science in Management, it was basically the first year of an MBA, but even more fast-paced with other classes on the side. So every 6 weeks, we had a 1-week thing, that program they called an ILE, Intensive Learning Experience. So the typical week would change every month and a half, where we would have the core courses, the final exams, and after that, the ILE. The first ILE was more towards creating the teams that you're going to work with for the entire year, and learn about how your leadership style. Lots of the classes that are offered on more of the soft skills, but otherwise the next ILE was you had to create an entire startup, and by the end of the week you were pitching in front of venture capital investors that were electing the best companies, the best ideas. So it could change quite often. You had also a big project to work on for about 6 months. Some teams it was for Dublin, some for Buenos Aires, others for Singapore. I was working on Singapore, so I was sent there for a week at the end of that entire time to finally meet with the client that we had worked with prior to it for a consulting project. So it's very hard to give you an example of a typical week, but in terms of workload, it's very fast-paced. There's a lot of things to prepare. There's a lot of quant work to do. There's also a lot of soft skills to develop, a lot of readings to be on top of. And depending on the professors, you have sometimes 3 deliverables per week.
Okay. Very good. And a typical day there?
Well, during the ILEs, most of the time it was, especially at the start of the program, it was from 8 or 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., sometimes later, just in terms of classes. Otherwise, when you were more in the rhythm of the core program, not during an intensive learning experience, every year is broken up into 2 cohorts. So some people had classes starting at, I would say, around 11, 12. Some people starting at 2 would finish at 6. Depending on your electives in the second semester, you could finish at 10:30, which was my case with the investment analysis elective. So most of my time, the entire year, I was more free in the mornings and had more classes in the afternoon. That's how it was for me, but it depends on how your schedule is created, depending in which cohort you're put into.
Okay. What did you gain from all that in addition to the international exposure? What did you gain personally, professionally, academically?
So personally, something that I wanted to build upon, even my experience at ESCP, was to be able to later on, be it ESCP or be it Georgetown, the students you're going to be with are other people from high level that you can expect to have successful careers. So it's personally good for yourself to be able to build this network already internationally. I've always looked at programs that had a lot of international students. It was the case for Georgetown. I would say from my own experience there that about 60% were non-Americans, if not a bit more than 60%. So now I know that in the future, regardless of what I need to do, or if I need to help the company I work for at that time, or people I know, or looking for projects, I can contact people in Singapore, in the United States, in Mexico, all of Latin America, a lot of East Asia, all the countries in Europe. Personally and career-wise, that's a solid point. I'm not sure a lot of Americans would resonate with this because they tend to stick to the US from the ones I've talked to. But if you're an international person and you're internationally inclined for your career, I think that's a big positive. Otherwise, the professors were amazing helps. They've been able to be in touch with you. They listen to you. They can guide you for your career. Professionally speaking, it was a tough year, but that's the case with anyone. Be it Georgetown, I've talked to students at MIT, at some of the best schools in Europe, in the US, and it was a tough year to land a job. So schools are really starting to implement career offices and career services that help you. But this year was not the year. So that doesn't mean they're not doing a good job. I think a lot of people experienced it, so I'm not going to cast a stone, but that was also a big help that I think is always going to improve year on year with the programs being more recognized, with the school doing more partnerships with the companies, which was the case for us.
So that it was the thing. So tell me, I'm writing a lot of articles now where I say that we never had so many people applying for top business school, whether it be MIM, MIF, or MBAs, and paradoxically, the job market is not at the level. Okay, how do you explain? You think there's a correlation between the two, or people are crazy? What do you think? People are insane?
I'll call back on my conversation I had with my professor of operations management that I already mentioned earlier in this call. I told him about an idea I had. In French, we talk about bac plus 5, which is 5 years of higher education, which is a big criteria for companies. So with my studies right now, I'm at plus 4 years of higher education. So I was still playing with the idea of maybe doing another one-year master. And I discussed it with him. And he said, he pushed me for it because he said that this year he taught also MBA students that normally are very high-level candidates that were struggling to even get internships. I read an article, you mentioned you're writing one on it. I read an article a couple of months ago about someone who graduated with a Wharton MBA over a year ago, and he's still struggling to find something decent. So I think internationally, the economy is not doing too hot. There's a lot of macro level factors that are going to be at play in the next few years. There was the summit of Kazan with the BRICS countries trying to start partnering together, where it's going to impact the USD usage over the world. So I'm going maybe too in depth with my macro level things. I'll go back on the question you asked about why people are struggling to find jobs and going back into education. The entire workforce is getting more technical, but I think there's a shift that's happening with managers and large companies with the arrival of AI, where up to last year, or the last couple of years before it entered and permeated every single facet of our lives, where before it was good if you were able to know a bit of everything. But nowadays, that's not good anymore. You need to become an absolute expert to still have a job and to still add value, because a lot of the less deep knowledge required is going to start using AI and leveraging it in every company as possible. A lot of managers are looking into it because it will improve their margins. They will have less money to spend on less costs associated to employment. So I think that's why people might still look towards furthering their education and their specialization, but that only means it's going to become even more competitive. With the more graduates and less jobs, it's going to be even tougher to stand out.
Yeah, but Pierre-Marc, don't you think that he should just have to be courageous, to be bold, and find a job and go for it? No, don't you think? You see me, I have a lot of jobs to offer, but I don't see anybody wants to take the job that you offer.
That's true.
Nobody wants to do it. Okay, so it's not a well-paid job, but people could create that job and be successful at the end. No, what do you think?
That's true. I agree with you to a certain extent that probably the idea. If you're
not given a job, create your job. No, Pierre-Marc, if you're not given a job, create your job. No.
Agreed.
That in a wealthy country like Monaco, France, there's a lot that can be done. No, what do you think?
I agree with you, but if everyone ends up doing this, you're going to have a lot of startups with not a lot of actual revenue or a lot of actionable business operations. What I will agree with you on is that nowadays it's becoming tougher to have your career trajectory thinking to yourself, I'll jump through those hoops, I'll go through this undergrad with this major, this minor, then I'll do this school for an MBA or something else. And except if you're really in the top 10% of your class at one of the top 10 schools in your country, it's going to be more and more difficult to, even if you do this, be able to really predict what company you're going to go into, what industry, what role you're going to find, and how many years of seniority you're going to acquire to get to that ideal as a managing director at an investment bank or other things. So to that point, I agree, but I doubt that the answer is going to be just create your startup. I've met a lot of people from ESCP that have started their companies, and I'll use a French term, I'll try to translate it in English, mais ils brassent du vent. They're just...
No, but you can be, you see, Pierre-Marc, you can be an outsourcer. Your company can be outsourcing. You don't have to create a startup. There are many ways of creating companies, but you can have yes, they can be, you can have an idea, or they can be basically a business that does not interest the big companies, but that is still interesting. You see? For instance, at MBA Center, we have a department that does outsourcing. So we write application for test prep. Okay. And if I were alone, I could do very well just from that. You see, it's not a startup. See what I mean? What I want to say is that, or you can work as a consultant. No, you don't think so? You can say you cannot hire me, but I'm going to create my company, and if you want to do business, we are happy to handle it, and finally make good money. No, no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So tell me, now it's interesting that you see the difference because you studied in both in the US and in Europe. But basically, one of the questions that our students have, they say there are two problems: the price. They said usually these American MBAs are masters are very expensive. Okay, do you think it was worth the price, or what would you answer to people who say it's a bit too expensive compared to what you can get in Europe? What would you tell them?
It's going to vary on a case-by-case basis of what you're looking for. If you're looking to get an experience in the US, if you want to not do your entire career, but even just a few years in the US, I still think that if you're at the very start of your career, doing a master's there is what's going to help you. That was the case. We had a lot of Indians in my program. And to go back to what you said earlier, they really wanted to stay in the US, so they got the first job possible, even if it wasn't the industry, if it wasn't the pay that they wanted. But since that was their goal, they went for it.
Okay.
However, if you're interested of a European career where the schools in the UK were still very good, but if the goal one day is to go to the US and you don't do a master in the US, you need to work for a transnational company, a multinational company that has interest in the US. You need to put in the work for a few years and then cross your fingers that a transfer will be possible and that there won't be issues with visas or quotas or anything. So it depends on a case-by-case basis. The value proposition of the program, I do think, was good. It's just that going back to the job market, also the job market is taking a hit. In the sense, salaries have dropped. A lot of my friends in my master's program, even in the American citizens who've stayed there, are being paid below par what normally is expected from a master's degree from a top business school. And that's something you can't really predict. I graduated before Biden even dropped out of the race. So a lot has changed on the global economy scene and on the political scene in the US. So I can't speak for how it's going to be for the people studying right now that are going to graduate next summer, or the people that are going to start studying this year. I can't predict it. If you're not an American citizen, it might be easier because the economy is picking up again and people are not scared of hiring you. While at the same time, if the policies that will be put in place for immigration might be tougher to stay there.
Yeah, probably, from what I understand, it's a bit contradictory. So Trump says that he wants to keep the best and he wants to give them a job in America, and at the same time, in terms of immigration, rules will be more strict. So it's difficult to understand what's going to happen. And same thing for protectionism. It's true that protectionism is going to increase price. Okay, so and it can have a negative effect, an immediate negative effect on the economy, and probably midterm. Of course, it's a beneficial effect. But for that, you need more than 4 years to handle it. So, what piece of advice will you give Pierre-Marc to someone who wants to with like in your shoes like 2 years ago? Should you go, for instance, for a specialized master, a general management master? Should you work a bit? Should you stay in Europe, in the US? What piece of advice would you give him or her?
The more people I talk to who are already in their careers, maybe I got different advice when I was younger, but the end goal is not just to do a master to get the master or to go somewhere. It's to land your job, and once you've landed your first job, go ahead. I'm in a position right now where like I said, I'm considering maybe doing another one-year master, but I'm starting to get some job offers. So depending on how things go forward, even if you do another master, if you already have a job offer now, it might not be interesting, except if you're 100% certain it's going to allow you to reach another step, very specialized role that you wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. I think that's the only thing. The end goal is to look at the job market, at what you want, and if that's going to get you in there.
Yeah.
Of course, if you add the variables of moving internationally, visa questions, that's something you need to accept, that it might seem like a good course of action, but it might still not pan out because there's so many things moving right now on the international scene. You can't be certain, but that's why you do a bit of a risk analysis before you make your decisions.
Okay, it's very good. So of course, I was very pleased to meet you. We'll send you access to Magouche, as I told you, because I will be happy to help you. So you have already received the access to the drive that I will ask Senia to buy you Magouche. So I will be happy. Let me know how it goes. I will be happy to see, because I don't have many students who study in the US. So I'll be happy to see, get your feedback, and to share your story with other students. Okay.
It's been a pleasure, Hubert. You know, we've known each other for a few years by now.
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah, 2 years, 2 years. You're a character at the same time, Pierre-Marc, but you know you're a nice guy. Okay, but yes, I understand you want to work in a big corporation, and it's the entry ticket is big. You see me when I was your age, I had like 2 interviews, and after 2 interviews, I didn't receive the job, and I said it's not for me. It is things, so I'm going to create my own company. So, I see that long term, you're right, okay, because it's more safe to have to work in the corporation. So I wish you a good day, and anyway, we meet quite often. Have a good day, Pierre-Marc.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, Dr. Hubert. Bye.